Hey everyone, so I wanted to discuss the idea that when you're adding functionality or a subsystem to a game, that it really should have a meaningful impact on the game. It should feel like it's a piece of a larger puzzle. It should feel like it's another thread in a tapestry. It shouldn't feel like something was tacked on to pad out the runtime. And that brings us to Battle Chasers Night War. It's a great turn-based RPG. I just finished playing it, but I really want to focus on just one aspect of that game, and that's the status effect system. It is quite possibly the best status effect system I've ever seen in an RPG. So there's two parts to the status effect system. One is the casting of beneficial effects onto your playable characters, so increase in defense, increase in attack, heal over time. And then conversely, there are the detrimental effects that you could apply to an enemy: a decrease in attack, a decrease in defense, a damage over time. Unfortunately, in a lot of games, the risk reward proposition just isn't favorable to the player because a lot of times status effects have a reduced chance of succeeding, so the enemy resists, or even if it does apply, it doesn't make enough of a difference to be worth it. Like maybe it's an accuracy debuff. So first the enemy might resist it, or if the enemy doesn't resist it, it's only an accuracy debuff, which means they might still successfully hit you with their attack. There's just a chance that they might not. In contrast, what Battle Chasers does is almost all of the status effects are guaranteed and yet not overpowered. And the reason why I say they're almost guaranteed is because any attack could potentially be evaded. So, having said that, let's get into some of the details. So one of the things that Battle Chasers does right is it tries to convey the status effect information in a way that is readily accessible to the player. In fact, it's kind of similar to what MMOs do. So what happens is when you get a status effect, a little icon appears over the health bar of either the player or the enemy. This is very similar to MMOs. Also, similar to MMOs, what you can do is, at least on the Xbox, if you hold the left trigger during combat, you can then, with the analog stick, select the various icons, the various status effects, and see exactly what that status effect does. The comparable system used in MMOs on PC would be that you would do a mouse over. You point the mouse pointer at the icon, and you get a tooltip, a little pop-up that says what the status effect is doing. So that's one of the things that Battle Chasers does right, is that communicating to the player. They want you to know exactly what's going on. But what's key to making the status effects system stand out for Battle Chasers is the fact that rather than having instant attacks that do damage and then these status effect attacks, they combine them. So for instance, Calibretto, he has an ability called Gut Punch. It both does instant damage, but it applies a Sunder to the enemy. The Sunder is an armor debuff. But what makes it even better is he has a separate attack that does increased damage if the enemy is under the effect of Sunder. So you've got two things going on there. You have a coupling of the status effect with a regular attack, and you now have the encouragement to use a different attack. So rather than just spamming the same attack over and over again, you're now encouraged to use a different attack because there is a benefit to using that different attack when the enemy is under a certain condition. The game takes a similar approach with buffs as well. So take Gully. Gully has a basic attack that increases the defense and the attack of the entire party. But they keep this from being overpowered because when you lose one, you lose the other as well. Gully also has another ability that applies a shield to everyone, and that shield absorbs a certain amount of damage. Well, this ability stacks. So Gully, she can actually cast the shield ability multiple times, effectively increasing your hit points by a substantial amount because those shields stack. But without a doubt, the character that really epitomizes how great this status effect system works, at least of the characters that I played, would be Red Monica. Red Monica has an ability called Chimera Sting. It does damage plus a random debuff. And these debuffs stack both with each other and themselves. So for example, say she does an attack, does damage, and it also poisons the enemy. She does another attack on her next turn, and this time it maybe does a fire damage over time. Well, one doesn't overwrite the other. Both are stacked, so they have a poison stack and a fire stack. She attacks again, and maybe she does another poison. Now it'll have 2 stacks of poison, and there'll be a little indicator showing that it's poison with like a little 2. So whereas a lot of games would just overwrite the damage over times or overwrite the debuffs, that most of them have the ability to stack like that. Also, she could do a random stun with Chimera Sting. And if that sounds overpowered, once she does a stun, the enemy then gets stun resistance. They become immune to it, I believe, for the rest of the battle. Another ability that Monica has is called Creeping Death. So I just mentioned about how a DOT can stack. Well, what Creeping Death does is it casts an auto-stacking DOT. So Monica uses the Creeping Death ability, and a single stack of poison applies to the enemy, doing just a small amount of damage. The next round, it auto-stacks, and it becomes 2 stacks, and then the next time 3 stacks, and I believe it maxes out after 6 turns to 6 stacks of poison, doing some really substantial damage to the enemy. And what this does is it really gives Monica concurrent attacks, because she only does Creeping Death once, and then for the next 6 rounds, it keeps progressively getting more powerful while she can do what other attacks that she wishes to do. So it basically gives her multiple attacks going forward until that ability either expires on its own or is cleansed, because enemies do have the ability to cleanse. That's another way that another check and balance that they put in place to keep this from being too powerful. And lastly, she has an ability called Love Bomb. Now, what this ability does, it applies every single status effect in DOT to the entire enemy party. Now that's the kind of magnitude of attack that you'd see a final boss in a video game do, not a player. So how do they empower the player like that but not make it overpowered? Well, a couple ways. First of all, you don't even get this ability until about 2/3 of the way through the game. So it's not like from the onset you can just start nuking the enemy. Second of all, there's also a couple thresholds. Monica has to earn the ability. She doesn't just get it by leveling up. There's a task she has to perform to get the ability. Also, it's based on the burst meter. And the burst meter, to perform this, has to be full to level 3. Well, you don't even get that level 3 until a fair amount of the way through the game. Like I said, like half to 2/3 of the way through. So there's a bunch of thresholds you have to meet before you even have access to it. So that's one of the ways that they keep it from being overpowered, is you don't have it for most of the game. The other way, as I said, you have to use your burst meter, and the burst meter charges when you're doing attacks. So it takes a whole bunch of attacks in order to get your burst meter that high. So once again, they have yet another check and balance to empower the player, but not make it overpowered. So what does Battle Chasers teach us about effective game design and RPGs in particular? I'd say primarily make a system that encourages diverse gameplay. We looked at several examples where one ability is more effective if it's cast after another ability. So that way you're encouraging the player not just to spam the same ability over and over again, but look for combinations that are really optimal for a certain situation. In short, the more they put in, the more they should get out. So that means really you're making a system that's flexible. It's a system that is open-ended, but still maintains game balance. The player really shouldn't feel that they're constrained. They should really feel that perhaps they actually came up with something that we hadn't intended, but not through a hack, not through an exploit, not through a cheat, but that they were able to push the character beyond the limits just by using certain abilities and using certain strategies. And so I'd really say that's the takeaway, is you really want the player to feel empowered and not constrained. Make a system that's open-ended, make it flexible, make it enjoyable, make it something that really encourages thought, encourages experimentation, and encourages strategy. Okay, so that's about it, and I hope this was helpful.